So tell me more, what other experiences did you guys have in these early days?
Well, I think it's fascinating if you take a look at the first book that Ethan and Janet wrote on online dispute resolution. They discuss the first cases, and if you look at the pattern across them, I will say it's fascinating that almost all of them involve gender. And so that raised issues of the impact of the ability to be anonymous online, and how obviously there's some real benefits to that, but that raises risks when people were perceiving who they're communicating with as being someone different than who they were. And technology became a new space, which we're very familiar with now, sadly, where harassment and cyberbullying and stalking could occur. And so there were a number of cases that were very gendered regarding that, or where people misrepresented who they were and broke trust in relationships. And of course, so there's so much emphasis, for good reason, on the explosion in the use of ODR around e-commerce as the business community engaged with it immediately. But early on, the first experiments, first role plays, and the first real cases actually involved many times interpersonal relationships, whether that was friendships or whether that was businesses that were separating or the like. And so we did role play practice for seeing what ways that the tools that technology offered would be useful, as well as, of course, with the eBay experiment, trying to develop the proof of concept for building trust online through what the reputational feedback system really is about trust building, but underneath, for those of us who come from the dispute resolution perspective, it's really dispute prevention, as well as an opportunity for dispute resolution. So here we were experimenting with that. And another thing, I do want to give a shout out to Professor Alan Gatenby. He was a graduate student at the same time as me and was heavily involved for a number of years, both in the early experiments and some of the early publications.
So, lots of questions. You brought up gender, and I was reading in some of Ethan's work. There was a story about a Joan. Do you recall this?
I don't recall the particular case.
About a man who was presenting himself as a woman online, claiming that he was disfigured, and he was then impersonating a woman and participated in a women's only listserv. The women who were participating with him believed that he was truly a woman from New York. It was all a lie. And when they discovered this, it created a lot of distrust. And this was one of the first early experiments where people were realizing, hey, we have to have some protocols or systems or management about identity. How do we know someone is who they say they are? And so this is one of the first things you guys are wrestling with, right?
That's
when
right.
you're dealing with disputes, how do you ensure that the person across the country who...
Or across a border even, yes.
Exactly, who you've never met, but who you want to hold accountable because maybe they did you wrong or they've accused you of doing something wrong to them. How do you even know that they are who they say they are?
That's right. There's a significant dilemma. And in the abstract, it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
But for the people involved, it raises risks around trust. It raises risks for self-disclosure if people are in groups where they're sharing their points of view or hoping to learn from one another and assuming that the person is who they are. So I think we still have some of those dilemmas today when we think about now that we have video conferencing, and we wonder, is anyone else in the room?
Yeah, that's...
And so some of the same concerns around confidentiality or around identity or about privacy are continued today as well, but with more magnification because we have also social media, which we did not have at that time. So we can take that information and it could be exponentially and permanently shared, except for in the EU, where obviously there's an opportunity to have things removed.
Yeah. When you were dealing with disputes initially with the BUD system that you guys were setting up, how did it feel? Just take us back into that time.
What a fabulous question. Since technology's changed so rapidly, it's very thoughtful to try to think back and try to remember what it was like. I mean, we're exploring a brand new terrain. And so just the idea that you could communicate through this new channel and receive an email from somebody else was both kind of mysterious and exciting. But then as dispute resolvers, I think it really, and I give full credit to Janet and Ethan for really taking the complete lead and being visionaries on this. But for those of us that were involved in the first few years, really starting to try to imagine how this medium could be a space in which people could be best understood. So for example, when you have all the other cues that mediators and arbitrators and those that are engaged in the judicial system, we're used to being able to look at body language or tone of voice. And doesn't mean we don't misinterpret or miscommunicate in those settings, but it seemed like all of that got shrunk and dissipated when you just have words on a screen. And so therefore, we were anticipating there would be a lot of opportunity for miscommunications. And I think one of the really interesting things that we had generated a lot of discussion was when emojis came to be. And we thought, oh, emojis can help. Or people started developing shorthand for saying just kidding to make clear. And some protocols with the early listservs were encouraging people to be thoughtful about their tone. And so those are the types of things that we were trying to think about in order to do conflict prevention. Or especially, we were hearing from a number of listservs about how one person's comment was being interpreted by many people or others, and the conflict was kind of growing and spreading, and it would be challenging. How do you reduce that? One of the things that's so common is in face-to-face mediation, for example, in the West in particular, is to try to shrink who is really at the center of the conflict and resolve it with them. Whereas when you're dealing with a listserv, everyone has automatically been impacted, and many people do not want to continue to be involved, but others do want to continue. And they also have a transcript, and in a culture that's so focused on the written word, then having a transcript makes something solid and last for a long time. And so these are some of the new dilemmas that we were thinking about.
Yeah, fascinating.